It seemed impossible. If you had asked anyone on the street back in 2012, no one would have bet on it. And yet, it just happened.
Italy overtakes the UK in GDP per capita for the first time in 2 decades.
At the end of 2024, adjusting for prices, Italy surpassed the United Kingdom in GDP per capita, €56,100 compared to £44,655. Yes, it's not exactly a 5-0 in a World Cup final, and okay, the Italians have been known to cook up their GDP figures as well as they cook their food. But there is one fact that no one can ignore. The United Kingdom is falling behind. Cities are expensive, government services are falling apart, and economic growth, well, it's been so long since they've seen it that it's now almost as legendary as King Arthur's Excalibur. And the worst part, fewer and fewer Britons believe this will change. Keir Starmer arrived at 10 Downing Street with promises of pragmatic reforms, fiscal discipline, and a healthy dose of deregulation, particularly in energy and housing. At times, he seemed more like Thatcher than a Labour leader. But naturally, governing is not as easy as making promises from the opposition.
UK markets slide as debt angst drives 30-year yield to 1998 high.
The situation was already critical, and right at the worst possible moment, boom! Government debt explodes and blows everything up even more. So let's get to the point. What on earth is going on in the UK? Why has its debt skyrocketed? And what does that mean for the reforms Starmer promised to save the country? Let's take a look. But first, let me ask you a quick question. How many AI tools are you juggling right now? One for writing, another for images, maybe a separate one for video. And before you know it, your wallet's empty and you're still switching tabs. That's why I want to introduce you to chatllm.abacus.ai, a single platform that brings all the top AI models together in one place. We're talking ChatGPT 5, ChatGPT o3 Pro, GPT 4.1, Gemini 2.5 Pro, Claude Sonnet 4, Grok 4, DeepSeek, the best of the best, and here's the smart part. Their built-in root LLM figures out which model is right for your prompt, so you don't waste time guessing. But it doesn't stop at text. You can create stunning images using the latest generators like Flux, Ideogram, Nano Banana, even ChatGPT's own image tool. Want video? Just type a prompt and get results from leading models like Kling, Runway, or Haleo. You don't need to worry about the AI feel in your content. Their Humanize feature rewrites output so they sound natural and even pass AI detectors. With just a simple prompt, you can build presentations, research reports, graphs, and charts. Or go big with Deep Agent, their powerful all-purpose AI that can design websites, build apps, create chatbots, and handle complex research from scratch. And here's the best part, it's only $10 a month. That's less than what you'd pay for just one premium tool elsewhere. So if you're ready to simplify your workflow and supercharge your creativity, head to chatllm.abacus.ai or hit the link in the description to try it today. And now, back to our topic. Before we can understand the current mess, we need to look back a little, because there is one episode that Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, has etched into her memory: Liz Truss's fall from grace. Yes, you may not remember, but after Boris Johnson's fall, a young and ambitious politician came to power, ready to turn the UK upside down. Brexit had been a disaster, let's not kid ourselves, but Truss still dreamed of turning London into the Singapore on the Thames. Her first step? A massive tax cut. The problem? She didn't touch government spending. So you can imagine the market's reaction. Total panic. Public debt shot up 50 basis points in a single day. It was absolutely outrageous. The crash was so brutal that Liz Truss had to resign after only 44 days in office. The woman who had arrived to revolutionize everything lasted less time than an iceberg lettuce. And why are we telling you this? For 2 reasons. First, so you can see how bad things are right now. During the Liz Truss crisis, debt shot up 50 basis points in a single day. Well, since Keir Starmer has been in power, the increase has been double that, 100 points. However, it's important to note that with Truss, it was like an explosion. This time, the rise is more gradual. It's not exactly the same story, but the ending could be just as ugly, because one thing is clear. The situation is serious. Very serious. British debt yields are breaking records, and the worst thing is that there are no signs of it stopping. And here comes the second reason why we're talking about Liz Truss's downfall, because that disaster gave rise to Keir Starmer's golden rule, a simple but strict rule. Current spending is paid for with taxes. no debt. Specifically, the taxes from the next 5 years at the most. Long-term debt should only be used for investment. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Sure does, but it's one thing to promise it, and quite another to deliver on it. Because it turns out that cutting public spending in the UK is more challenging than the 12 labours of Hercules. Healthcare and pensions consume such a large chunk of the budget that there's hardly any room to manoeuvre. And on top of that, we're talking about protected spending. Literally. There's the famous triple lock, a sacred guarantee that requires pensions to be revalued according to the highest of these 3 factors: inflation, wage increases, or a minimum of 2.5%. In other words, a kind of guardian angel for pensioners, and a nightmare for public finances. But the worst thing is that this is not the only conundrum on Mr. Starmer's plate. The other big elephant in the room is personal independence benefits, in other words, disability payments. The issue, the concept of disability is becoming increasingly broad, and if you add to that an aging population, the result is ever-increasing spending. In 2016, this assistance cost less than £5 billion, but by 2030, it's estimated that it will exceed £40 billion, an increase of 8 times in just 14 years. Things are so bad that Starmer, yes, a Labour Prime Minister, proposed cutting £5 billion from this budget, 20% of the current total. And how did that work out for him? Well, let's see. If it had worked, the interest rate on the debt wouldn't be sky high, and we wouldn't be here recording this video. 124 of his 165 Labour MPs turned against him. It was a real internal mutiny. In the end, a solution was reached. There will be cuts. Yes, but only for new beneficiaries. Those who are already receiving benefits won't lose a penny, and this is not an isolated case. Something similar has happened with the winter fuel allowance, a subsidy to help pensioners pay their heating bills when the cold weather sets in. Because in case you didn't know, the price of electricity in the UK is one of the most expensive in the developed world. This also explains why their GDP per capita has been stagnant for so long. And we need to make one thing very clear here. The type of debt depends on the risk of default. No, we're not saying that the UK is going to default in the style of Argentina, but there is another way to pay off debt, with inflation. You promise to pay £1,000 in 30 years. But if then that £1,000 is worth less than monopoly money, the investor still loses money. The more out of control the government budget is, the more the markets fear inflation. And the more they fear, the more interest they demand. And here we enter a loop. Debt rises, interest rates rise. More of the budget is eaten up, debt increases further. A vicious circle. Of course, there is another way out. Raise taxes. But that comes with a slight hitch as well. Starmer's popularity is at rock bottom, and most polls now place him below Reform UK, the Brexit party founded by the controversial Nigel Farage. And do you know what usually does not help boost a political party's popularity? That's right, raising taxes. For now, the government's position is clear. No tax increases for ordinary people. So what have they proposed instead? Well, that's the problem. They haven't yet explained exactly how they're going to solve it. Meanwhile, uncertainty is driving up debt, which gives the government less room for manoeuvre.
Higher borrowing costs have reduced Reeve's headroom against the current budget rule, which requires the government to fund day-to-day spending via tax revenues by the end of the Parliament, to just over £4 billion from £9.9 billion.
One of the ideas under discussion is a wealth tax, particularly on the very wealthy. You know the idea, let the rich pay. Now then, there's a small problem. The rich are leaving the UK faster than Prince Harry and Meghan were a few years back. And those who are staying, the upper middle class, tend to be boomers. The same people who have secured their pensions with triple locks and who, surprise surprise, carry a lot of influence at the polls. So in that setting, raising money is complicated. Another option? Impose a new tax on banks. Let's be honest, a significant portion of that will end up being paid by their customers. In other words, ordinary Britons. Furthermore, this sector is already heavily penalised by the tax system, and more taxes could jeopardise one of the few sectors for which London remains a global leader. And then there is the third major alternative, a very quiet move that governments such as Spain's are taking full advantage of, the famous cold progressivity. What does this consist of? Not deflating, not updating income tax brackets with inflation. And so, without changing a single comma of the law, people pay more taxes in real terms. The higher your nominal salary, the higher your tax bracket, the more tax you pay, even if your purchasing power remains the same or worsens. Note that British income tax is already frozen, but in theory, it should be updated in 2028. Now, according to one study, if the government keeps this on ice, it could raise up to £8 billion extra. So the question is clear. What do you think the government will do when 2028 comes around? Will it update the brackets or pretend it has forgotten? Let's be clear though, whatever they choose, there's an uncomfortable truth that no one can ignore. The tax burden in the UK is at an all-time high, almost at post-war levels. This country no longer has any room to squeeze the rich any further. If it wants to raise more revenue, it will have to dip into the pockets of the middle classes, even more than it already does. And here, the big question is not who has more, but who's going to pay more. A fair distribution among everyone, or a burden that will fall entirely on the shoulders of young people. In short, the government has many expenses, but fewer and fewer ways to collect revenue. Investors know this, and since they fear that the solution will be to inflate the economy to liquidate the debt, they are demanding even higher interest rates. But pay attention, the story doesn't end there, because there are two major players that are also behind the British debt boom: pension funds and the Bank of England itself. For years, pension funds were addicted to British government debt, a bottomless pit of state funding. But that has changed. These days, they prefer other instruments that are more profitable and diversified. Why? Basically, due to a change in model. Previously, it was typical to take out defined income plans. You retired, and the fund guaranteed you a lifetime payment. But now, for tax and regulatory reasons that are irrelevant here, piggy bank plans are the norm. You save, you invest, and you withdraw what you can. And naturally, those funds are no longer tied to anyone. They prefer to invest in international markets. The result, less demand for British debt, and if supply remains the same, the price goes up. And then there's the other major player, the Bank of England. It has recently reduced its purchases of public debt. Why? To clean up its balance sheet and leave room for maneuver in case another crisis, such as COVID, comes along. With all this in play, you can now get a pretty clear idea of what is happening in the UK. But if we ended the video here, we would be ignoring one very big elephant in the room, because so far we've only talked about British domestic politics. But there's more. Sky-high interest rates are not a problem exclusive to the UK.
Why Japan's long-term government bond yields have surged to multi-decade highs. French bond yield reaches 14-year high amid political turmoil. Germany's long-term borrowing costs head for 14-year high.
The cost of debt isn't just rising in the UK, it's rising all around the world. And that brings us to a new global problem. There's too much public debt and too few willing to buy it. In 2023, the wealthy countries of the OECD issued $14 trillion in bonds. This year, we're already at $17 trillion, a veritable avalanche of debt. But clearly, with the economy in turmoil, due to Trump's tariff war, geopolitical conflicts, everything, investor appetite is at an all-time low. And here's the irony. Many thought that if the dollar weakened, investors would rush to buy bonds in euros or pounds, but that does not appear to be the case. The market no longer trusts Uncle Sam, but it doesn't trust Europe either. In the end, the big winner has been gold. And speaking of winners, there's another theory as to why British debt is skyrocketing. What if the reason debt is so expensive is that the UK economy is starting to take off like a rocket? After more than a decade of stagnation, the UK has been the best performing G7 economy in the first half of 2025, well ahead of the United States. With this in mind, some suggest that debt is rising because the market believes the economy is overheating, so the Bank of England will keep rates high to keep inflation in check, which has hovered around 3.7% in recent months. Does this theory make sense? Well, it does have a point, but it's not that the economy in general is overheating. These positive GDP figures can be explained by a very simple reason: government spending. We're talking about investment in housing, renewables, electricity grids, investments that are not yet bearing fruit, but are boosting GDP. So there you have it, we're back to square one. The culprit is in the imbalance between government spending and revenue. Even so, it's true that it's not all bad news with UK's debt. Check it out.
UK raises record at 10-year sale as higher yields boost demand.
Interest rates are sky high. True, but at least there's still demand for British debt. Believe me, this is already much more than other countries such as Japan can say, but we'll talk about that another day. Keir Starmer managed to place £14 billion in one of his latest auctions, a record. Demand exceeded supply by 3.3 times. Yet, this did not stop the debt rate from continuing to rise. And if there's so much demand, how is it possible that debt is becoming increasingly expensive for the government? Shouldn't investors be fighting over who offers the cheapest rate? Well, yes, in part that's true. But remember that there are many other developed countries offering very attractive rates right now. So if Starmer lowers them a little, he may lose a good part of this demand, and everybody will rush en masse to buy, I don't know, French bonds? So sorry, but no, there are no magic solutions. Starmer will have to balance the budget before it's too late. Every day he delays means more interest he'll have to pay in the future. The question, of course, is who will end up footing the bill? And now it's your turn. Do you think Starmer is managing the economy better or worse than Liz Truss? Will the UK manage to reverse the debt boom it's been experiencing in recent months? Will it choose to cut spending or raise taxes? You can leave your answers in the comments. Don't forget that here on Visualeconomik we release new videos every week, so subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. If you like this video, hit a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. See you next time.